We don't have that kind of money lying around. Sarah, you need to be realistic about this. Dad stood in the doorway of my apartment, arms crossed, his voice firm but detached. Behind him, Mom nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line like she was forcing herself to agree. On the kitchen table, the medical bills were scattered everywhere. The biggest one circled in red. $85,000. That was the price to save my 5-year-old son's life. From the next room, I could hear Ethan's shallow breathing, the quiet hum of his oxygen machine filling the silence. "Please, Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's his only chance." Mom's reply was soft, almost rehearsed. "Sweetheart, we just paid for Jessica's wedding. We're still trying to recover. Maybe try one of those online fundraisers?" I stood frozen, the words hitting me harder than I could breathe. $235,000 for my sister's wedding. Champagne, chandeliers, and flowers. But not a single dollar for their grandson's life. My name is Sarah Parker, and for most of my life, I thought my parents were the definition of love and family. We weren't rich, but we had enough to live comfortably. A cozy house in the suburbs, family dinners every night, and a backyard where Dad grilled steaks every Sunday. My dad, Mark Parker, owned a small construction company. He was the kind of man who wore dusty boots and came home smelling like paint and sawdust. Yet he always smiled when he walked through the door. My mom, Linda, was a second-grade teacher. She had this soft, calm voice, the kind that could make a crying child stop mid-tear. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect family, the Parkers. Normal, happy, stable. But inside those 4 walls, things weren't as balanced as they seemed. I had one sister, Jessica, 2 years younger than me. Jessica was the golden child from the very beginning. She had the perfect smile, the perfect grades, the perfect everything. If she wanted something, she got it. When I asked for a new bike at age 10, Mom smiled gently and said, "Sweetheart, we can't afford it right now. Maybe for your birthday, okay?" A week later, Jessica got a brand new iPod because she needed it for school. I remember sitting on the front steps that evening, watching Jessica dance around to her new music, and thinking maybe I just needed to stop asking. That moment, as small as it was, became the story of my childhood. Jessica got attention. I got understanding. She got yes. I got wait, and I told myself that was okay. Because deep down, I believed they loved us equally, just differently. As we grew older, the gap between us widened. Jessica was always praised, always adored. Mom bragged about her grades to anyone who'd listen. Dad framed every award she brought home. When I got a part-time job at the library, no one said a word. But when Jessica got accepted into a private university in California, my parents threw a dinner to celebrate. Dad raised his glass and said proudly, "To Jessica, the future of our family." Everyone cheered, and I smiled, pretending that my heart didn't sting. I didn't get to go to a fancy university. We couldn't afford it, Mom said. So I stayed home, went to community college, and worked at a cafe to pay for my books. I remember waking up at 5 a.m. to make lattes for people on their way to jobs I could only dream about, but I didn't complain. I wanted to prove I could build my life without leaning on anyone, that I could be independent. Years passed. I graduated, got a decent job, moved out. Then I met Daniel, the kindest, humblest man I'd ever known. He wasn't flashy or rich, but he made me feel seen. Where my family often made me feel like an afterthought, Daniel made me feel like the center of his world. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, on a quiet evening, in our small apartment with fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It wasn't perfect by society's standards, but it was ours. And I couldn't wait to tell my parents. When I called Mom, her reaction was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Daniel seems like a good man." No excitement, no tears. Just polite approval. Still, I was hopeful. Maybe they'd help us celebrate. When I brought up the idea of a small wedding, Mom sighed. "Honey, we just can't afford a big wedding right now. You understand, right? Things have been tight with Dad's business." Of course, I understood. I always did. So Daniel and I planned a simple ceremony. We borrowed a friend's backyard, strung up fairy lights, and invited 15 people. My best friend took photos on her phone. My dress was borrowed. My makeup was done by my cousin. And our dinner was homemade. It wasn't glamorous, but it was beautiful, because it was filled with real love. I remember looking at Daniel as we exchanged vows, thinking, this is enough. This is what family means. Mom and Dad attended, sitting quietly in the front row. Jessica was there too, distracted, checking her phone between smiles. When the ceremony ended, Dad shook Daniel's hand and said, "You're a good man. Take care of our Sarah." That was the last moment I felt like we were a family. Together. As months passed, Jessica's career took off. She got engaged to Brad, a wealthy banker from Los Angeles. Mom was over the moon. Suddenly, the woman who couldn't afford to help with my small wedding was talking about venues, floral themes, and destination ceremonies. I didn't think much of it at first. But when I saw the wedding invitations, gold foil, embossed lettering, and a list of luxury vendors, my heart sank. I realized then, the word can't in my family didn't mean we don't have money. It meant not for you, and though I didn't know it yet, that unfairness would grow into something unbearable, something that would test every belief I had about love, family, and what it truly means to be cared for. Because years later, when my son's life depended on a single phone call, the same parents who said they had nothing to give me would spend $235,000 to make sure Jessica had her dream wedding. And I would learn, in the hardest way possible, that sometimes the people you trust most can break you in ways no stranger ever could. It started with a phone call on a quiet Saturday morning. I was folding laundry when Mom's name flashed on my screen. "Hey, sweetheart. You won't believe it. Jessica's getting married." Her voice sparkled with excitement. I could almost see her smiling through the phone. I paused mid-fold, a small lump forming in my throat. "Wow, that's great, Mom. When did that happen?" "Brad proposed last night. He took her to that fancy rooftop restaurant. You know, the one downtown. He had a photographer and everything. She sent me pictures. Oh, Sarah, it was perfect." I smiled faintly. Perfect. That word again. Jessica's life had always been a series of perfect moments. Perfect school, perfect job, perfect fiancé. And now the perfect wedding. I congratulated Mom and hung up, trying to shake off the small ache in my chest. I wasn't jealous, I'm not exactly. I just wished, for once, Mom could sound half as happy when talking about my life. A few weeks later, my parents invited Daniel and me over for dinner. Mom had made her famous roast chicken, the kind she only made for special occasions. The table was set beautifully. Candles, fancy plates, even wine glasses. That should have been my first sign. We sat down and Dad cleared his throat dramatically. "So Sarah, we wanted to tell you something important." Mom reached across the table, her face glowing. "Jessica's wedding will be in California, at the Seaside Orchid Resort." She said it slowly, like revealing a royal announcement. I blinked. That's a 5-star resort, isn't it?" Mom's smile widened. "It's gorgeous. Right on the coast. Brad's parents offered to pay part of it, and we'll cover the rest. It's going to be the wedding of the year." My fork froze midair. "Wait, you and Dad are paying for it?" "Of course, honey. She's our daughter. This is her big day." I stared at her, the words twisting like a knife. Just a few years ago, they couldn't help me with a backyard ceremony because they couldn't afford it. Now they were casually talking about funding a luxury beach wedding. "How much are you helping with?" I asked quietly. Mom exchanged a quick glance with Dad, then said, "Well, around $235,000 in total, but that includes the venue, photography, and honeymoon. Brad's parents are covering some too. $235,000. I felt my stomach drop. Daniel's hand slipped under the table, giving mine a gentle squeeze, grounding me. Wow, I said softly. "That's a lot." "It's worth it," Mom said proudly. "Jessica deserves the best. You know how hard she's worked." I wanted to scream. I had worked hard too. Harder, maybe. But in this family, effort didn't matter. Only image did. The rest of dinner blurred together. Mom talked about florists and designer gowns, about matching themes and gold accents. I nodded, smiled, and pretended I cared. When we got home, Daniel turned to me gently. "You okay?" I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just need to remember my place in the family, the spectator." He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself cry. The months leading up to Jessica's wedding felt like living inside someone else's movie. Every conversation with Mom revolved around it. Every weekend was a new wedding update. Jessica's having a designer dress made in Italy. Brad's family is booking a private yacht for the after-party. The resort will serve truffle pasta and imported champagne. I'd nod politely on the phone, even as I fed my toddler plain soup for dinner because Daniel's company had just downsized and things were tight. We weren't struggling, but we weren't splurging either. Still, I never asked for help. I'd learned that help, in my family, came with strings. Or worse, silence. As the wedding drew closer, invitations went out. Each envelope was thick and embossed in gold foil, with our names written in elegant cursive. When ours arrived, I noticed something small but sharp. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Parker. No mention of our son Ethan. I called Mom, confused. "Hey, Mom, I think the invite might be missing Ethan's name." "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "The resort is keeping the event adults only. You understand, right? Jessica wants a sophisticated atmosphere." I went quiet. Sophisticated. That was their polite word for exclusive. I looked at my little boy, playing with his toy trucks on the floor, and my heart cracked a little. He adored his Aunt Jessica. He had even practiced saying her name. Now he wasn't even invited. When the wedding week finally came, we flew to California. The resort was breathtaking. White sands, crystal blue water, and glass villas overlooking the ocean. It felt like stepping into a luxury magazine. Jessica greeted us in a silk robe, surrounded by makeup artists and bridesmaids. She looked radiant, glowing in a way only money and attention can make you glow. "Sarah!" she squealed, hugging me lightly so as not to smudge her makeup. "I'm so glad you made it." Her tone was sweet but distant, like a hostess greeting a polite guest. Later that evening at the rehearsal dinner, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At one end of the long table sat Jessica and Brad, smiling, surrounded by both families. At the other end, Daniel and I were seated near distant cousins we barely knew. Every toast, every laugh, every camera flash revolved around Jessica. I couldn't help but think back to my own wedding. Small, simple, quiet. No chandeliers, no champagne towers, just love. And suddenly, I realized how differently love looked to my parents. To them, love was money spent, appearances maintained, reputations built. To me, love was showing up, even when no one else did. The next morning, Mom knocked on our villa door. She looked radiant in her gown, pearls glimmering under the morning sun. "Sarah, sweetheart, can you help with something small?" I smiled faintly. "Sure, what do you need?" "The wedding planner needs someone to hand out programs at the entrance." "You'll be perfect for it." There it was. Not maid of honor, not sister of the bride, just the helper. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Of course, Mom." As guests arrived, I handed them their gold programs with shaky hands. When Jessica walked down the aisle, in a gown worth more than my house, everyone gasped. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But standing there, watching my parents' eyes fill with pride and joy, I realized something I'd been denying my whole life. No matter what I did, no matter how much I achieved, I would never be enough for them. And in that moment, under the golden California sun, surrounded by laughter and luxury, I made myself a silent promise that one day I'd stop seeking their approval. Because some love, no matter how much you chase it, was never meant to be returned. After Jessica's wedding, life slipped back into its usual rhythm. Or at least, I tried to make it feel that way. Daniel went back to work, and I spent my days juggling freelance bookkeeping jobs while raising our little boy. Ethan. He was 5 years old now, bright, curious, and full of life. The kind of kid who could turn a bad day around with just one smile. Our lives weren't glamorous like Jessica's, but we were happy. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then one evening, everything changed. It started with a cough. A small, dry sound that didn't seem serious at first. "Probably allergies," Daniel said as we tucked Ethan into bed. But a week later, the cough got worse. He'd wake up at night struggling to breathe, his little chest rising and falling too fast. We took him to the pediatrician. They ran tests, blood work, x-rays, and told us to wait for the results. 2 days later, the doctor called us in. I'll never forget that sterile white room, or the way the doctor's voice softened before he spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, the results show that Ethan has a rare heart condition. It's serious but treatable with surgery." My world tilted. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Surgery?" Daniel managed to ask. "Yes," the doctor said. "A specialized procedure that can correct the defect. It needs to be done soon, within a few months. But it's expensive, around $85,000. $85,000. I remember gripping the edge of the chair just to keep from shaking. We had some savings, but nothing close to that. Our insurance covered only part of it. And time wasn't on our side. the doctor added quietly. I know that's a lot, but it's his best chance. Without it, the risks increased dramatically. My hands went cold. That night, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table in silence. The house was dark except for the hum of the refrigerator. He ran a hand through his hair. We'll figure it out, Sarah. We'll do whatever it takes. I nodded, but my chest felt tight. We tried everything. Loans, grants, charity programs. But the process was slow, buried in paperwork and waiting lists. Weeks passed. Ethan's condition worsened. That's when I thought of my parents. For years, I had told myself I wouldn't ask them for anything again. But this wasn't about pride. It was about my child's life. So one afternoon, I called Mom. Hey, Mom, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, sweetheart. It's been ages. How's little Ethan? Her voice sounded cheerful, distant. I swallowed hard. Actually, that's why I'm calling. He's been sick, Mom, really sick. Her tone softened slightly. Oh no, what's wrong? I explained everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the cost. I told her how hard we'd been trying, how time was running out. There was a long pause on the other end. $85,000? She repeated, like testing the number. Yes, I said. I know it's a lot, but you and Dad... Sweetheart, she interrupted gently. You know we don't have that kind of money lying around. My heart dropped. Mom, I'm not asking for all of it. Even a part would help. We'll pay you back, I promise. Another pause. Then she said the words that would burn in my memory forever. Sarah, your father and I just finished paying off Jessica's wedding. We're still recovering from that. Maybe you should start a fundraiser. People do that nowadays, right? For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my hands trembling. A fundraiser? I whispered. You spent $235,000 on a wedding? And you can't help your grandson with 85? Honey, it's not about that, she said quickly. It's just different situations. Weddings are planned, this was unexpected. And we're not young anymore. We have to think about retirement. I felt my heart shatter. He's your grandson, I said quietly. And you're his mother, she replied, as if that somehow settled everything. That was the moment I realized the love I thought existed in our family was conditional. Conditional on appearance. Conditional on convenience. I hung up and sat there, staring at the phone. Daniel came in, saw my face, and didn't have to ask. They said no, I whispered. He exhaled slowly, jaw clenched. I figured as much. We both sat in silence. No tears, no shouting. Just the heavy weight of disappointment settling between us. That night, as I watched Ethan sleep, a small oxygen mask over his face, something inside me hardened. If my parents wouldn't help, then I'd find another way. I worked longer hours, took on every freelance job I could. Daniel sold his old car. We cut every expense, cable, eating out, even heat on some nights. I reached out to charities, online campaigns, strangers on the internet, anyone who would listen. Slowly, the donations trickled in. $50 here, $100 there. People who didn't even know us cared more than my own family. Then one evening, Jessica called. Hey, Sarah, she said in her usual breezy tone. Mom told me about Ethan. I'm so sorry, that's awful. Thanks, I said tightly. We're doing our best. Yeah, I wish I could help, but Brad and I are planning to buy a house soon. You know how it is. I bit my tongue. Her wedding photos had gone viral among her friends. Chandeliers, fireworks, even a champagne fountain. And now she was talking about a new house. I understand, I said quietly. You're strong, Sarah, she added. You've always been independent. You'll figure it out. Independent, the same word they'd all use to excuse their neglect. I ended the call and cried harder than I had in years. Weeks passed, and the surgery date approached. We had raised most of the money, not all, but enough for the hospital to schedule the operation. The night before the surgery, Daniel and I sat beside Ethan's hospital bed. He was sleeping peacefully, a small IV in his arm, the machines beeping softly. I whispered to him, You're the bravest boy in the world, baby. Mommy and Daddy love you so much. He stirred a little and smiled in his sleep. And in that quiet hospital room, I realized something powerful. Family isn't defined by blood or money. It's defined by who stands with you when everything falls apart. My parents might have turned their backs, but we weren't alone. We had each other. We had love. And that was more powerful than any check they could have written. The weeks after, Ethan's surgery felt like a blur, like I was living in slow motion while the rest of the world moved on. The hospital walls had become my second home. The smell of antiseptic, the quiet beeping of machines, the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. I could close my eyes and still hear it all. But for the first time in months, I wasn't filled with fear. I was filled with something else. Gratitude. Ethan's surgery had been successful. He was recovering, slowly but beautifully. My little boy was smiling again. Every morning when I saw his face light up as the nurses entered his room, I felt my heart melt. Daniel and I would take turns sleeping beside him. And when he was strong enough to sit up and ask, "Mommy, can I go home soon?" I broke down in tears. "Yes, baby." "Very soon," I whispered, stroking his hair. But while Ethan was healing, I was changing too, in ways I never expected. After the surgery, news spread among the family about what had happened. Jessica called me one evening. Her voice was quiet, almost nervous. "Hey, Sarah, I heard about Ethan. I wanted to say, I'm glad he's okay." There was a long silence before she added, "Mom's been crying a lot. She feels terrible." I wanted to say something sharp. Something like, tell her she should have cried when I asked for help. But instead I just said thanks and hung up. Because truthfully, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Done trying to understand why love had conditions. Done chasing approval that should have been given freely. A few days later, my parents came to visit Ethan in the hospital. It was the first time I'd seen them since that night. The night they refused to help. When Mom walked into the room, her eyes immediately welled up. She looked smaller somehow, fragile, tired, and older than I remembered. "Sarah," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." Dad stood beside her, silent. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, his jaw tight, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked at Ethan, who was playing quietly with his toy cars. Then I looked back at them. "I'm glad you came," I said softly. "Ethan's doing better." Mom took a hesitant step closer. "We should have been there for you." I don't know what we were thinking. We were just so overwhelmed with Jessica's wedding, and her voice cracked. "I was wrong, Sarah. We were both wrong." Dad finally spoke, his tone heavy with regret. "I thought we had time. I didn't think it was that serious. I failed you as a father." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them how many nights I cried. How I begged the universe for help while they were toasting champagne under fairy lights. But instead I took a deep breath and said the only words that mattered. "I forgive you." The look on Mom's face broke me. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she covered her mouth. "Sarah, after everything we did?" I nodded. "Yes, because holding on to the anger doesn't help anyone. Not me. Not Ethan. I don't want to carry that anymore." For the first time, Dad's eyes softened. "You're stronger than we ever were," he said quietly. We stood there in silence, a family fractured by choices, but still bound by something deeper than disappointment. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was the first step. Weeks later, when Ethan finally came home, our little house felt alive again. Daniel cooked his favorite meals, mac and cheese, pancakes with strawberries. We spent evenings playing board games and laughing about nothing at all. One evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with those same bright eyes and said, "Mommy, are Grandma and Grandpa still mad at us?" I smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. They're just learning." He nodded as if he understood something far beyond his age. Then he whispered, "It's okay. I still love them." That night I realized, forgiveness isn't just something you say. It's something you live. It doesn't erase the pain, but it frees you from it. A month later, Mom invited us for dinner. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. But another part of me knew that healing meant walking back into the places that once hurt. When we arrived, the house looked different. The wedding photos that once covered the living room wall were replaced with family. Pictures and all of us together. Even one of Ethan smiling in the hospital. Mom hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "I've been reading books about forgiveness," she said quietly, setting the table. And I realized something. Love isn't proven by money. It's proven by presence. I wasn't there when you needed me most. I won't make that mistake again. Dad poured Daniel a glass of lemonade and added, "You raised a good man, Sarah. I see that now." The dinner wasn't perfect. The air still carried unspoken guilt. But for the first time it felt real. Honest, human. When the evening ended, Mom handed me a small box. Inside was a check, not for money, but a note. It read, "For Ethan's future, for your strength, for what we should have done long ago. We can't undo the past, but we can start being the family you always deserved." I folded the note and smiled. "This means more than you think," I said. And I meant it, because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about acknowledgement, about them finally seeing me, not as the shadow behind Jessica's glow, but as their daughter who had survived the unthinkable with grace. As I drove home that night, Ethan asleep in the back seat, Daniel reached over and took my hand. "You did it," he said quietly. "You broke the cycle." I looked out the window at the soft glow of the city lights. "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly. "Or maybe I just stopped trying to fix something that was never mine to fix." And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The days after my parents' decision felt like a blur, the kind where time keeps moving but your body doesn't. It was like living underwater. Everything around me was muffled, heavy and distorted. Daniel tried to stay strong, but I could see the cracks in his calmness. Every time he looked at our son, his eyes dimmed a little more. We'd spent countless nights watching medical videos, reading about treatments, praying for a miracle. But without the $85,000 for the surgery, those prayers felt like whispers in a storm. I called every contact I could think of. I begged, borrowed, and reached out to charities. Some kind souls helped with small donations. But the amount we needed still seemed unreachable. Every morning, I'd wake up and check the fundraiser total, hoping, but it barely moved. And the one thing that haunted me most was the image of my parents, laughing and dancing at Jessica's extravagant wedding, as if they hadn't just shattered their own family. One afternoon, I drove to their house again, not to plead, but to understand. Mom opened the door, her face frozen somewhere between guilt and irritation. "Sarah, I thought we talked about this." "Yeah," I said quietly. "We did. But I need to ask you something, and I want the truth." She sighed, crossing her arms. "Go ahead." "Why?" I asked. "Why couldn't you help? It wasn't even for me, Mom. It was for your grandson. You had the money, you have the money, so why?" Her lips pressed together. "You don't understand how complicated these things are. Your father and I already committed to Jessica's wedding. We couldn't just back out. It would have embarrassed her. It was her special day. Her special day." The words hit me like a slap. "So my son's life wasn't special enough?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Wasn't important enough?" Mom's voice softened a little, as if that would make it better. "Honey, I'm sorry, but we can't always save everyone. Sometimes you have to accept what life gives you." I just stood there. No yelling, no crying. Just the hollow silence of realization. She wasn't sorry. Not really. They had made their choice. And it wasn't me. It wasn't my family. It wasn't their grandson. It was Jessica. Always Jessica. When I left their house that day, I knew something inside me had broken for good. Not in a way that could be fixed. More like a string that finally snapped after years of being stretched too thin. I didn't tell Daniel much that night. I didn't have the strength. Instead, I walked into my son's room and sat beside his bed, holding his tiny hand. Machines beeped quietly around him. His skin looked pale, but his fingers curled weakly around mine. "Mommy's here," I whispered. "And I'm not giving up. I promise." Even when the world had turned its back on us, I couldn't. I wouldn't. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. One of the charity coordinators I'd contacted earlier called back. "Sarah, you might want to check your fundraiser page," she said. When I opened the link, I froze. Overnight, the total had skyrocketed. 85,000, fully funded. I couldn't believe it. It turned out that a local news outlet had picked up our story about a family torn apart because parents refused to save their grandchild. The public had rallied behind us. Strangers donated, people shared our link everywhere. And the internet did what my parents couldn't. It gave my son a chance. Daniel hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "We did it," he whispered. "He's going to make it." And for the first time in months, I cried, not out of pain, but relief. The surgery was scheduled within days. Those hours in the waiting room were the longest of my life. Every tick of the clock echoed like thunder in my chest. But when the doctor finally walked out, smiling, I knew. "He's stable," the doctor said. It went perfectly. My knees gave out. I laughed and cried all at once. Daniel caught me, and we just held each other as years of fear melted away. Our little boy was going to live. I didn't hear from my parents during the surgery. Not a call, not a message. But after a few weeks, when my son was finally discharged, I got a text from Jessica. "Heard your fundraiser went viral. Guess you didn't need mom and dad after all, congrats." No apology, no empathy, just the same cold entitlement she'd always had. I blocked her number and deleted the message, because in that moment I realized something powerful. I didn't need their validation anymore. Months passed and my son grew stronger. We celebrated his recovery with a small gathering at home. Balloons, homemade food, laughter. It wasn't grand or expensive, but it was real. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he asked, "Mommy, are Grandma and Grandpa coming to visit me?" I hesitated. My throat tightened. "They're busy, sweetheart," I said softly. "But you have so many people who love you. Me, Daddy, your friends. That's what matters." He smiled sleepily and said, "I love you, Mommy." And just like that, all the pain, all the betrayal, felt lighter. Because he was my reason, my purpose. A year later, I got an invitation in the mail. Jessica was pregnant, and they were throwing a lavish baby shower at my parents' house. $30,000 on catering, the invite said proudly. I stared at it for a long time. Then quietly I threw it away. I didn't need to show up to a place that had forgotten what family truly meant. I learned something that year. Family isn't defined by blood or money. It's defined by compassion, by the people who stand beside you when the world turns its back. My parents chose image over love. They chose one daughter's spotlight over another's desperation. But I chose peace, and in choosing peace I found strength. Today, every time I look at my son, alive, laughing, full of light, I'm reminded of one truth. I didn't lose a family. I just discovered who truly belonged in mine.